That was an outstanding panel discussion, and I greatly appreciate the participation from all the panelists. That was very enlightening. It's now time for us to go to the public comment session for our in-person and our online stream audience who've been participating and following the proceedings here. So I now have invited all my colleagues to come back to the desk and now call for any questions or comments from our in-person audience. If you have any, there's a microphone that will be available to you, and Dr. Mark Varner will be able to help facilitate. Do we have any questions or comments from anyone from our in-person audience?
Do you want to go to the online questions?
If we don't have any in person, we have an in person, then we'll go to the online. Right here, Dr. Oh, there we go.
Howdy. My name is Dexter Gauntlet. I'm the Director of Business Development for a social enterprise called SweetSense. We provide remote monitoring services for water systems in emerging markets. So we're monitoring about, by the end of this year, we'll have sensors on water points providing real-time data on boreholes, so electric pumps, serving 5 million people in East Africa. And so my question is, given this context of, we all hear about the ICT for D 1.0, which is about getting hardware more like laptops out in the field. Then 2.0, you've got this IoT kind of craze happening, right? And all of these different technologies, and then you throw in expanding cellular connectivity and increasingly low-cost satellite networks, right? So all of a sudden, you can collect data in new methods across a variety of different water, energy, infrastructure applications that USAID and others are always funding. And we also at the same time know that monitoring and evaluation often at the end of, say, water projects, often indicate that many of these infrastructure type of investments fail very early, right? Now, kind of given that context, the combination of technology, the need for real-time data, and the need for these kind of social enterprise business models, how do you see the landscape? Here actually comes the question. How do you actually see using these tools, these real-time data sources, with your monitoring and evaluation programs, particularly for measurement and et cetera?
Turn to my colleagues for any comments.
I'll be happy if someone else does it. And again, I come from private sector, so my answers may be a little bit different, but there's obviously an aggregation of, data is only as good as its garbage in, garbage out, right? So data is only as good as the amount and the quality of that data, so it has to be statistically significant from multiple sites, gives us multiple levels of confidence, which reduces risk metrics as far as we're concerned with everything else that we push out. So for us, those kinds of stationary and even virtual measurement systems are very valuable. And I think that there's a need to link that private sector with a lot of the research that's being done, as well as the others. And there's something of a disconnect sometimes there. And a number of universities here, we've talked about some, I think we've mentioned now there's 24 innovation labs, and others that are now integrating and creating new technologies and then pushing those out. Hopefully some of that technology will then be pushed out into private sector partnerships. But the value that holds is is going to be leveraged up tremendously, even more than we have in the US, I think. So the ability to match those with other technologies that are able to be integrated is going to be, to me, the key. So working inside a box is tough. The challenge that I see is in places here where we're able to aggregate groups of technologies in San Francisco, New York, and Austin and such, and where I'm from in Boulder, is much easier. Where it's tough to get everybody together in Nairobi or Kampala or what have you, but to be able to aggregate those technologies so that we can get synergy from them and fill in the gaps with what else is needed is something of a challenge. And I would propose that it's something that we could probably work on, and I think it's a mission and a vision that a number of us have. So if that answers your question to some. Okay, thank you.
Good answer. Any other?
Hi, my name is Ina Schoenberg. I'm currently with Harvest Plus and IFPRI. Just in the last session, for the first time today, as far as I could catch, there was reference to this issue of scaling and what kinds of interventions can really be scaled, can really influence a big group of people. And I think there's the potential for a bit of tension between sort of what Tim was talking about, the best impacts for an individual household or a community are when you've got complex, big delivery, lots of interventions, but typically implementing agencies or governments don't have the money or the capacity to do that kind of intensive work at scale. And at the same time, you want to sort of identify what kinds of, how can you affect systems, whether it's food systems or livelihood systems or market systems or advanced warning climate systems that improve resiliency for a large group of people across the board. So as a board that's advising programming in general, how will you ensure that you've got, or do you want to reflect upon how you get the best balance of investments in systemic changes versus sets of interventions that are really going to have high impact but for very small groups of people. If you've got a very localized emergency and you've got plenty of funds, then you can put that into impacting relatively small numbers with really impactful activities. But you look at Bangladesh, or you look at, all kinds of contexts where there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people at risk, where then there's a lot of tricky decision making, and there's lots of good work that can be done in many different arenas, but how do you have a portfolio of programs that makes the biggest difference? And I think that's something that you want to be grappling with a little bit, and I didn't hear much discussion about scale, so maybe that's more of a comment than a question, but I think it might be something for the group to reflect on.
Looks like you're talking about somewhat of a rapid response type situation where you have a critical crisis or something that's occurred in a region or a country. And I know that our experts here with USAID and other agencies are very apt at being able to respond to those challenges. But I think what we've been, at least what I've observed today, is looking at how we're strategically trying to address for more of a long term and planning for the future. Because we know that the world is growing, the population is not stopping. And, you heard Administrator Green talking about by 2050, we're going to have nearly 10 billion people on this planet. And 25% of those people are going to be Africans. And that's going to put great stress and pressure on resilience in a tremendous way. And how are we working together, all of us together, academics, our agencies, our NGOs, and everyone involved, to address the challenges. And of course, rural youth and how we're going to address the challenges there and the pressures that places on resilience and opportunity. So yeah, I agree with you. I think there ought to be some way to have programming and ways to address things that are needed in emergencies and critical crisis situations to deal with the challenge at hand, but we also have to keep our eyes on the long term. At least that's my thought on it. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments?
I think you're making a great comment back to the leadership of these programs as well.
Yeah,
and,
I think that's right.
Yeah, and just to agree and build on what Dr. Keenum said, what I got excited about hearing today was basically sort of walking on two legs. So the kind of commentary that Tim was giving us, that what we're really doing is taking advantage, turning the crisis into an opportunity. Because when you have those crises, there's going to be more goodwill towards dealing with those crises and partnering with the governments and putting resources at it. And then you have this entire discussion by the academic community that is actually looking at a broader scale, both in space and time. And I think what your question is getting to is, how do we continue moving all of this forward, but with the discussion, we're feeding each other, so that we get smarter faster. And so I think it's got to be those parallel pathways going forward. And I hear you already doing that. So it's a matter of just how do we do this connecting so that we're feeding each other and not doing it on parallel tracks.
Dr. Varner, do you have any online questions?
I do. We've had 2 days of BIFAD meetings, and 100 to 150 people registered for each of those days. We've had questions from Morocco, the UK, Nigeria, Ghana, West Africa for an individual who works in Burkina Faso, and of course the US. So a very broad range. I'm going to start with, I have 3 questions I want to read here, and the first is from Dr. Nirajaka, who is with ADCI VOCA here in DC. Thank you for organizing this workshop. My question is for Jen Cisse and Tim Frankenberger regarding the use of panel studies. In a purpose of assessing whether the project's interventions are effective to increase resilience, how can we make sure that the bias is minimized and that the households selected for the study don't receive more or better quality interventions than households who are not part of that? From worker in Burkina Faso, this is a question for Marco. What are the requirements to obtain RIMA, R-I-M-A? For one of the panels this morning, for smallholder farming systems, which is usually more vulnerable to climate variability, like drought spells, what are the key factors or parameters that we should use when we want to measure resilience of the farming system to climate variability in a Sahelian zone of the developing world? And thank you. So we'll start with
Dr. Cisse
answers.
is right over here.
We're starting with Tim.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that we try to do when we do, so what's important to understand is, like in the prime work that we're doing, the 3,200 households that were originally chosen, that is a panel that we follow for 5 years. Okay, so we, at the baseline and end line, we actually are surveying the same households. Then on the recurrent monitoring that we're doing, we're also surveying a subset of those 3,200 households. And so we're essentially tracking some households for 4 years straight. Now, the way that we choose those households is we worked with the program and we found out which ones are going to, and this is before the project actually started. We found some places where they weren't going to concentrate a lot of interventions and other places where they were going to concentrate a lot of interventions. And we actually oversampled in the area where they weren't going to put too many interventions because we wanted to be able to use propensity score matching at the end to actually see if these characteristics are matched up on the households and that it was truly the project itself that was making the difference on why these households were doing better. And so we weren't, everybody that was selected in the sample then didn't get more interventions in the place, in 2/3 of the place. So the thing is that we very much tried to avoid that kind of biasing in the selection of the sample.
Thanks. Yeah, this is Jen. I'd say, so my focus on the usefulness of panel data was not specific to a particular intervention or data set. The LSMS-ISA data set with which many of us have worked, I think, is it's nationally representative. So while it's not going to be used necessarily to look at the impact of a particular intervention, what it allows you to do is understand poverty dynamics by taking advantage of the panel nature of nationally and usually sub-nationally representative data. So that's one option when you're interested at really understanding perhaps determinants of resilience and poverty dynamics at a household level that's not going to be biased. And usually most of those data sets do have questions, and the surveys have questions about, are you receiving benefits from this program? Are you getting transfers from the government for this program, et cetera? So you can control for those types of things. There are other things you can do. I know the index-based livestock insurance program, for example, they gave out coupons to households to buy insurance. Some households randomly got coupons, and the coupons varied in amount, so you could kind of see so you could use that as random variation to understand people's willingness to buy insurance and how that impacted the impacts of the insurance program. So there are lots of different kind of statistical things you can do to avoid bias issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Cisse.
Yeah.
Marco?
Okay, thank you for this question, and I hope that our friend from Burkina Faso is still online following our discussion. It's a very good question how to approach RIMA, and the idea is that we as FAO, we work with institutions, so we work mainly with the National Bureau of Statistics or other, I don't know, Office of Prime Minister or ministries or other UN agencies. So I'm not entirely sure where this friend is coming from, but in case he's part of one of these institutions, he should just approach our FAO office, country office. Then it will be taken to the regional office, and then my team is the last part, so we will arrive at the end of a long chain. If he's, I don't know, a university or some private institutions, we, as mandate, as FAO, we don't work with private entities or bodies, but we are still interested in exploring synergies, so just drop an email, and I'll be happy to put in touch with our resource in Dakar, which is covering the whole region, including Burkina Faso, Madame Aminata Traoré, and we can certainly have like an external support from our side in order to implement RIMA.
Very good. Thank you. I think we have one in the back.
So, just to address the fourth question posed that was relatively generally targeted at anyone in the early morning presentation, I'm sure anyone would have a good answer for it, but basically it sounded like the person was posing a question as to what elements of resilience should be considered for smallholder farmers, specifically in the Sahel, maybe Burkina Faso, but generally in the Sahel. And that's a great question in the sense that that is a very classic context for the considerations of resilience. So what I would say is just that any of these frameworks could be well adapted to that setting, and it'd be a great, in a context like that where you're looking at a new space to you or just a specific context, figuring out what the shock profile is like, what affects people's lives, and doing some research to back that up. You can take that to adapting any one of these frameworks that are out there, and a lot of information is available about them online, to that setting. But I would say it's basically a perfect setting for the kinds of questions that we're all talking about today. So just to address that person, who I hope is still listening, and thank you for your question, if you are.
All right. I think we have a question right here, Dr. Bowen.
Good evening again. Thank you so much for BIFAD and USAID for the wonderful two-day event. Listening to Kuta. My name is Rosemary Segero. I'm the president of Segero's International Group based here in Washington, D.C. We have had great words, information, and ideas from the academias and the other people. So my question, as I comment to the professor from Clark and the man who spoke in the morning about the community doing research. When you are doing research, policy, you're dealing with people. You're not just dealing with any. So that guy there brought people, rural people, to talk to what they are doing and what is happening. And at the end, they might have eaten or said, but they were very happy to see them working together. So how do you bring these people looking at the universities, local universities in Kenya, in other countries? And this Africa has 54 countries. These people don't speak the same language, and some, you saw my brother here from Niger struggling with English. He's a professor, but he still would not make it in English. So how do we make this really understand the funding into the professor, translation of the local languages, local people working together from the grassroots to upward there, putting this information we are talking, even if it's in research, in local language so that people understand. These people are working hard for us and they are doing good things for us. So this is why we should work all together, including the local people, academians, the BIFAD president, the officials, and everybody. So this is why I've stood again to say thank you again for the wonderful event, but we need to be all together from the grassroots, those who know academia and everybody. So this is why I'm saying thank you so much, and let us involve us in whatever you think is right and we can do for Africa and other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone have a thought or comment? Jim?
I'll comment. So I also apologize. I need to run to the airport here in just a minute. So I think that echoes maybe a comment that was made by a couple of different people throughout the day of the continued need to find ways to interact with international students who are going to come to the States, experience the rigor and the building of cohorts and teams and connections that will last a lifetime, and take it back in to their country and be able to be communicators not only of the disciplines that they're learning here, but be able to communicate back to us the social impacts, the on-the-ground connections that we have seen through not only people that we have all know and work with, but the statements that were made, you know, throughout the day of how critical that is. So I think I will take from that the continued need for BIFAD to find ways to support the ability for international students to get into the States, whether it's through funding or access or whatever it might be.
Very good. Any other comments, questions from the audience? I'm sorry.
Sure. Since I also will have to get out of here in a few minutes. I think the last 2 days have been absolutely fantastic. And I want one more time to congratulate the planning committee, because in my time here in BIFAD, this has been a perfect harmonization of the conversations about agricultural research and the importance of the social sciences research to walk in tandem, to make sure that we realize important policy decisions that can truly impact and transform those developing countries. Also, in the last session, I really appreciate the underlining about the importance of universities remaining flexible and nimble and agile, and for us in administration to create the necessary porous membranes that can allow the free flow of ideas and projects to go back and forth. So this has been a very productive conversation. So I want to thank you for your ideas and for your recommendations.
I echo your comments. Thank you. Okay. Well, I tell you, I think it's time, if he would be so kind as to come back up, Dr. Mark Constas, who's with Cornell University, and ask him to kind of wrap this up and give us a summary of what we've heard today. Dr. Constas.
So thank you. I'd like to open by thanking the organizers as well, and the collection of panelists, and the productivity that came out of the panel that gave me a monumental task that resembles a data reduction exercise. How to get this down to just a small number of ideas that captures at least part of the essence of what happened today. So what I'd like to do is, my closing comments are motivated by a question that surfaced at several points during today's event. And the question was something like this: for what aspects of resilience measurement is capacity development needed? Where do we need additional development? Where do we need strengthening? So using this question as a point of departure for my closing comments, I'd like to offer a few suggestions, again, not spontaneously created here, but based on everything I've heard today, in the form of potential or focused programs of work around which resilience, further efforts to improve resilience measurement may be based. The first one, and let me take a step back before tell you how these are organized so you can brace yourself with the condensed list, is I have 6 topics around which a structured program of work on resilience measurement may be based, and 5 structural innovations. And I won't elaborate on them, but I think you'll get a sense, and hopefully they should all be familiar. and resonate for what you've heard today. The first one asks a question and saying, what are the theoretical foundations for resilience measurement? And I think it's important, a number of issues came up in our session, and it's important to think how those issues can be consolidated and how they can be made tractable as far as application is concerned. And I think one thing that's important, and this emerged in that one panel discussion, and at various points in other panels as well, is that there are different types of theory or principles at work, and these need to be clearly articulated and seen as opportunities and as a way to strengthen resilience measurement. There are psychometric principles that tell us what needs to be measured, or rather how our measurement can develop and what needs to be measured. This is exemplified by a number of panelists. There's analytical models that tell us how we need to deal with the data that we get. There are substantive theories that really need further development, and that helps bring the notion of a causal mechanism into focus. And reflecting on one comment that Mushfiq made this morning, he said that RCTs are a gold standard. However, they don't answer all questions. And one thing that a RCT does not answer, it does not help us understand what the causal mechanism is. And so as a bow, an important and genuine bow in the direction of practitioners and policymakers, a theory of change contains a causal mechanism that one day has to be merged. And this is the job of the measurement people, using a theory of change as a point of reference. The measurement should serve a theory of change. It should identify the causal mechanism within that. And that's the importance of substantive theory. So that's number one. Number two, resilience measurement that models systems and identifies metrics and thinks about ways to incorporate a systems perspective into resilience measurement. This came up in a number of ways, and I think we need a disciplined and rigorous approach to think about systems. At one of the lunchtime conversations I had, it was suggested that the idea of systems is very attractive. It's also mind-boggling and dizzying at moments. And many of you may have been in meetings where systems and perspectives are discussed, and what you may have seen is a lot of words inside of circles connected by a seemingly infinite collection of lines, and without any coefficients attached to them. We're not sure what they mean. They may be energizing, but they're also exhausting. It's not clear how they're productive. So this element, really thinking about how to operationalize this notion of systems and bring that into the way we think about resilience measurement is a second area, second topic. Thirdly, resilience measurement that highlights the value of qualitative methods and demonstrates the importance of fine-grained analysis afforded by qualitative methods. This actually connects back to the substantive theory in understanding what the causal mechanisms are at play. One needs to go down and have a very close look at what's going on, and qualitative methods and ethnographic methods give us the opportunity to do that. So that's a third area. A fourth area, the need for resilience measurement that reflects both contextual sensitivity and it identifies common core indicators. Beth Dunford, in her comments this morning, talked about trying to identify metrics that transcend context. So both being sensitive to context, but understanding where their common core metrics as well. And this came up in a number of talks. And your talk did this, and you had a wonderful graphic where you're looking for the common set. A fifth area of work that needs to be carried out to strengthen resilience measurement and where capacity needs to be developed is thinking about criteria and guidelines that draw attention to the importance of subjective measures as a central element of resilience measurement. Here we need to think about what are the dimensions of resilience measurement that use subjective measure, what are the properties of those, and what methods can be employed to get at those best, both quantitatively and qualitatively. The fifth topic that needs attention, and this in some ways is the master recommendation. Everything fits inside of this if you wanted to. How can we conceptualize and operationalize and indeed create a culture of actionable evidence? This idea of actionable evidence is thematic for something we've talked about today, and that's the work of measurement, is to produce actionable evidence. And it's important here to draw a distinction between evidence and data. Nobody said actionable data, they said actionable evidence. Data has no purpose in and of itself. Evidence serves a particular purpose. I think it was a nice phrase that came up, I think, by Greg Collins and by others echoed that. Here in this line of work, we need to think about what decisions is the evidence served, and what actions are going to be taken. And we understand and meet that demand for evidence in the front end and as a driving force in how we conceptualize our measurement efforts. So those are 6 topical areas, I think, that really emerge in today's discussions. As for structural innovations, I have the 5 I'll list here. The first is to build networks of graduate students or early professionals. And there is now a critical mass, I believe, across universities that wasn't there 10, 15 years ago, who were thinking about resilience measurement in developing country contexts. So that was I think, an important structural opportunity here. Secondly, create and foster collaborations and partnerships in field settings and working more closely with our partners, not just to build capacity, but to get smarter about what it is we should be measuring in the first instance. The third structural innovation is thinking about, and this is a call to arms for universities, thinking about innovative curriculum and how to seed the field in the future. And here, gosh, I'm blanking on his name for a moment. Carr, your first name again? Ed, sorry, Ed. Ed's comment, he gave many examples of his university, how they're trying to do things that are innovative, that are encouraging students and academic programs across the traditional kind of stodgy disciplinary boundaries, and to really focus on problems and the complexity of problems rather than letting the disciplinary boundaries hold us down. So that's a third important structural innovation. A fourth one is to create a platform for shared indicators. Again, this was mentioned not just in our discussion, but also in the early discussion. I noted that I believe it was by James Beaver's comments. He noted that that in his work, they try to do things that allow them to get beyond the impediments that go along with intellectual property. And so even there, and maybe beginning there, that's a good point of reference. And we don't do enough of that in the social sciences. And Tim, I remember many years ago at one of the early meetings we had in resilience measurement, you called for this, that we should have a shared set of indicators that we can draw upon. And if we're all measuring things differently without harmonization, it's difficult to have the whole field move forward. And I think that's 1, 2, 3, that's the fourth. The fifth one is we need to create an inventory of the array of institutional resources that already exist. In this last session, they made a number of comments, and there's one that Tiffany mentioned at the University of Michigan. There was another one mentioned, I've forgotten, but there are already institutional platforms in existence. And before we think about creating new ones, we should get a clear sense of what's already in existence, how that can be leveraged, and how those organizations and those entities can work together to underwrite innovations in resilience measurement. So I'll stop there. That's my list of the 6 important topics and a series of structural innovations. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Constas, for that wonderful recap and summary. Well, we're getting close to the moment of adjournment here, but I want to make just a few quick comments about my observation of my very first BIFAD meeting that I've been able to attend both yesterday and today, and how impressed I was. First of all, with the quality of the presentations that we received over these 2 days on youth employment and development and initiatives, and of course theoretical and applied resilience, and all the discussion that we had here. You know, I guess I'm a former academic in my earlier life, more of a politician in my most recent days, and now I'm just a lowly university president. And even I could understand most of what was being discussed, okay, over these last 2 days. So that's pretty impressive. And I think one of the things, position where I'm in, and I've been at my university now for 10 years, and I came from a background of working in this area a little bit and having a great appreciation for the challenges of the future of our world. And I think one of the things that we can do and be focused on in our academic world for young people is to inform them of what's going on in their world around them. And the future, the young students that I just shook hands with, over 3,000 graduates at my university last week, you know, by the time they're, goodness, in their early 50s, this world's going to look a lot different than it does today in so many ways. And while we have these young, bright, talented young people on our campuses, to enlighten them and make them understand what their future is about, and maybe inspire them to want to pursue careers in science and research and try to help make a difference. You know, that's what gets me excited about these type of opportunities. And I've really enjoyed the discussions and the presentations, and I can tell you for my role on this board moving forward, it's going to be very helpful to me in working with my colleagues and working with the administrator and working with our great team here at USAID and trying to be constructive and make a difference and maybe move the ball in the right direction. So I've been very honored and blessed to be here today and to be with these distinguished colleagues. My goodness, to be on a panel, a board with these very impressive individuals, it's a great honor for me. I want to also, thank you. And I want to again thank the organizers and everyone who had a hand in making this happen. I want to again thank Dr. Clara Cohen, who's very instrumental, being our liaison for this board with the administration. Corinne Garnier, Greg Collins, Tiffany Griffin, Dr. Cisse, Kristen Franklin, all of USAID. And I also want to thank Mark Varner, who's been around dutiful with the microphone and keeping us on time, Shay Ways, and Megan Collins, all with APLU, our wonderful partner in this endeavor. I want to thank you very much for all you did to help make this a successful conference and board meeting. And so with that, I now declare the 175th meeting of the BIFAD board adjourned. Thank you.